I want to take maybe one final question, and then I'm happy to mull around and stick around forever. Thank you again for coming.
I'm just curious, again, Glenn Sims.
Yeah.
Protesters.
Yep.
Trudeau's and Freeland Strand, your government stance to invoke the, not the Measures Act, National Security, whatever it was, the act.
Yep.
And freeze people's bank accounts. Where do you stand on that, considering your comments on extreme governments and
Sure. Yeah, look, I was in Ottawa at the time, Glenn, back in February of 2022. And what I would say is a couple things. I remember at the time there was real frustration because, look, we had been going on almost 2 years of the pandemic. I think everyone was ready to try to move on. It had been a real challenge in a lot of people's lives. And I think everyone can sit back at a certain time and armchair this and say, well, the government, the policies, because remember, they weren't all federal. A lot of these were provincial as well. I think everyone can sit back and say, well, governments were too cautious, or maybe they should have been more, on top of it, whatever. People are going to have that different spectrum of what they thought was acceptable risk. There's people in this room right now that would have had relatively low risk as it relates to COVID, and there's some people in this room that would have had a lot higher risk to COVID. I actually think our entire approach to COVID-19, maybe we were too restrictive longer, maybe, but the whole emphasis was trying to protect lives. And the emphasis was trying to make sure that people were going to be able to go home and see their families. I'll take criticism whether or not we did well enough or not on that. I actually think even Trudeau's harshest critics, when I went to the door in 21 and otherwise, would say, no, actually your government did pretty good on pandemic. I don't really like you guys, but I thought you did okay there. Emergencies Act itself, the idea that this was everyone that was there was a bad person or that they were out with bad motives, no, absolutely not. I was there, and I spent 3 weeks going, sorting my way through the House of Commons, through what was going on. There were some well-intended people that were frustrated about government policy, that were upset and wanted to express themselves. There were people there that I think had other motives, and they were a little bit darker than, they were upset about government policy. There were people that openly spouted about the idea of trying to overthrow governments. That may seem far-fetched to us in this room, but it is serious, and some of the conduct was quite terrible. I don't live in Ottawa. I stay in a hotel when I'm there. If you were an Ottawa resident, you were pretty sick of this. You couldn't get out of your house. The honks were going all night. There had to be some way to bring this to, the point had been made, Glenn. And when people refused to follow the orders of police to disperse and to go down, there was a clear lack of leadership at the municipal and provincial level to try to deal with what was happening. It wasn't just in the nation's capital. There was border crossings that were being blocked that were having impact on trade. When you look at the threshold in the Emergencies Act, it is a security threat to Canada. People can interpret that different ways. I think the majority of my constituents I talk to actually think, some people say, why did the government take so long to try to help out and deal with this, right? This will be appealed. I think ultimately it'll be a further definition of what actually constitutes a security threat to Canada, and whether or not that has to be changed, I don't know. In a perfect world, Ottawa Police and the Ontario Provincial Police could have been able to handle this so that everyday businesses and residents didn't have to be completely inundated and impacted. But I think at a certain point it became that the Government of Canada had to act in concert with those types of local police authorities to support it. It was a 10-day element. I know for those who were closest to it and who may not have liked the federal policies, they would say, well, look, this was heavy-handed, this was shitty. I don't see it that way, and ultimately I also appreciate if the court says that we didn't quite get it right, there's a mechanism for parliamentarians to vote on it, and now we'll further know what the threshold actually is. This had been the first time it had ever been used. The War Measures Act was a much more restrictive policy where it suspended all civil liberties. This was quite narrow. It was about largely the requisition of tow trucks to be able to actually try to remove some of the heavy vehicles out of Ottawa. So look, Canadians are going to have their say. It'll get appealed, I suspect, to a higher court. We'll see if that decision is upheld. And I think most Canadians have had kind of their view on whether or not it was good or bad. I don't think it was facetious of the government to implement. I don't think it was done in bad faith. I think it was trying to help a situation to resolve the issue, particularly in Ottawa and elsewhere in the country.